Thanksgiving at the Morgan House was designed to look effortless. White linen pulled tight across a table long enough to seat 12, crystal catching the late afternoon light, a catered turkey carved by someone whose name I didn't know, the kind of abundance that pretends it arrived naturally. I stood near the end of the table with a paper envelope I hadn't opened yet, my coat still on. I'd come straight from work. Elaine noticed immediately. She always did. When the glasses lifted, she rose with them. Not to toast, to correct something. She crossed the space, took the envelope from my hand, and slapped it down on the table hard enough to make the cutlery jump. "You should know your place, Rachel," she said, voice clear, practiced. "Look around. Is there anyone here living off a monthly paycheck like you?" Victoria laughed first, a short, sharp sound. She didn't look away from me. "Mom, don't embarrass her," she said. "She's not a failure, she's just disposable." There was a pause, the kind that happens when everyone decides not to intervene at the same time. Elaine's hand came next, not from anger, from certainty. The slap landed across my cheek, open-palmed, loud. Not in a kitchen, not behind a door, at the table, between cranberry sauce and silverware. I felt the heat first, then the room tilt slightly, like a boat correcting itself. I tasted salt and metal. Someone cleared their throat. No one stood. I smiled. It surprised even me. On my wrist, half hidden by my sleeve, the Patek caught the light. No one noticed. It cost more than Victoria's SUV. I wore it because it kept time accurately. That mattered. My phone vibrated once in my pocket, just once. Probate court confirmed. You are the sole beneficiary. Net value, $980 million. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. Elaine was still standing. Victoria was still smiling. The room waited for me to shrink, to apologize, to justify my existence. I picked up my coat instead. The slap was meant to mark me. It didn't. It marked the moment they spoke freely, on record, in public, while every quiet document I'd collected stayed exactly where it was, waiting. In my family, there was always a main seat and a spare. I learned early which one was mine. At dinners, it was the chair nearest the kitchen door, the one that caught drafts in winter and heat in summer. At weddings and birthdays, I was placed at the edge of the table, close enough to be useful, far enough to be forgettable. If an extra guest arrived, my name was the first suggested to be flexible. The walls told the story more clearly than anyone ever did. Framed photographs climbed the staircase. Holidays in Aspen, graduations, beach houses at sunset. Victoria appeared everywhere. Different ages, different smiles. I wasn't in any of them. Not cropped out, not hidden in the background, simply absent, as if I had never stood in those rooms at all. When I noticed, Elaine said it was an oversight. The word was delivered lightly, like a napkin apology. It was never corrected. Money followed the same pattern. Victoria's tuition was paid on time, even when she transferred schools. Her apartments were furnished before she arrived. When she needed extensions, exceptions were made. When she failed a class, the dean received a phone call. When she cheated, it became a misunderstanding. My expenses arrived as conversations. I was reminded that independence built character, that struggle was educational, that if I really wanted something, I'd find a way. So I did. At 16, I worked evenings clearing tables at a steakhouse off I-95. On weekends, I sorted inventory in a cold warehouse, learning to read labels under flickering lights. I memorized lecture notes between shifts. I slept in 20-minute fragments. When I got into college, Elaine called it luck. Victoria said it was timing. I paid my own medical bills, negotiated payment plans with offices that smelled like disinfectant and patience. I learned how to sound older on the phone, how to say, "I understand," without meaning it, how to keep receipts. Victoria failed out of 2 programs before anyone called it a problem. Even then, the problem was framed gently, like weather, temporary, unfair, not her fault. The truth arrived quietly, the way real damage often does. I was reviewing my student account one night, cross-checking numbers I knew too well. A line item didn't belong. A withdrawal dated years back. A signature that wasn't mine. The college fund my grandfather had set aside, mine, had been partially emptied. Not lost, redirected. The money had gone to cover Victoria's credit card debt. Retail. Travel. A balance that had grown while I was washing dishes and shelving boxes. When I asked Elaine, she didn't deny it. She explained it. Family helps family. Victoria was fragile. I was capable. I could adjust. That was the word she used. Adjust. The final adjustment came with an envelope. Inside was an offer and a decision already made. My plan to study abroad, approved, funded through scholarships I'd earned, was no longer practical. The family needed resources focused elsewhere. Victoria had another restart coming. Another chance to be protected from consequences. I folded the letter carefully and put it back. That night, I started keeping copies. Nothing dramatic. Statements, emails, forms with mismatched signatures. I scanned everything and stored it where no one thought to look. I didn't know yet what I would need it for. I only knew I would need it. Paper doesn't forget. It waits. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, years later, I was no longer asking for a seat. I had learned to stand quietly, collecting what fell when people believed I didn't matter. They called it invisibility. I called it coverage. Failure is a useful disguise. People stop asking questions when they think they already know the answer. I let mine harden slowly. After college, I moved to Texas and told my family it was temporary. Cheap rent, a job opportunity that wasn't exactly permanent. Elaine nodded with relief. Distance, to her, meant resolution. What I didn't say was that I incorporated within 6 months. The company didn't carry my name. It couldn't. I chose something neutral, forgettable, 3 letters that sounded like a storage unit. The paperwork ran through a holding structure that led nowhere obvious. I learned early how easy it was to disappear legally if you were willing to be boring. We started with routing software for regional freight. Nothing flashy, just optimization, reducing waste, saving minutes, then hours, then contracts. I hired engineers who preferred quiet work and no press. We reinvested everything. I took no salary my first 2 years. When infrastructure projects followed, I didn't attend the announcements. I sent representatives. I read filings instead of headlines. I owned percentages that looked small until you understood scale. To my family, nothing changed. I kept my old car, the air conditioning rattled in summer. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. When Victoria visited once, she wrinkled her nose and said, "You're still doing this to yourself?" I said it was fine, that I didn't need much. That was true. I didn't need approval. I didn't need noise. And I didn't need them watching. By the 3rd year, one of our partners folded an infrastructure loan into a secondary market sale. I noticed a familiar address in the portfolio. Greenwich. A property I'd memorized from childhood. The Morgan House. I didn't rush. I waited until the timing made sense. Then I acquired the debt through a layered transaction that never pointed back to me. The mortgage didn't change hands publicly. It simply obeyed new instructions. I never missed a payment on their behalf. That wasn't the point. While the company expanded, I spent my evenings doing something less visible. I archived. Every email Elaine sent about money. Every forwarded bill. Every temporary request. I kept recordings of phone calls where voices sharpened once they thought I was cornered. I saved contracts with altered dates, statements that didn't align, signatures that wandered. I labeled the folder insurance at first, then renamed it paper. Paper doesn't argue. It doesn't raise its voice. It waits until the room is quiet enough to be heard. I retained an estate attorney before anyone thought I needed one. He specialized in complicated families and ungrateful heirs. He asked me once why I was planning so early. I told him I preferred exits that didn't require permission. The tax specialist came next, then compliance, then a second legal opinion whose only job was to assume everyone else was wrong. They never met each other. They didn't need to. To my family, I remained unchanged. The daughter who never quite launched. The one who sent modest gifts and declined help. The one who didn't correct assumptions. At holidays, I listened more than I spoke. I noted dates, repeated stories, inconsistencies. Victoria liked to talk when she felt safe. Elaine liked to explain when she felt in control. Both were generous with evidence. By the time Thanksgiving approached that year, my life existed in two layers. The visible one was narrow, deliberately unthreatening. The other had structure, leverage, and patience. They thought I stayed small to avoid discomfort. The truth was simpler. I stayed small so they would keep talking. And they did. They didn't come at me all at once. That would have required courage. Instead, they built a story and stepped back to admire it. Elaine called first. Her voice carried urgency carefully measured, like a medication dose. The family was in trouble. Cash flow issues. Temporary. Complicated. She said words like liquidity and exposure as if they'd been rehearsed in front of a mirror. The solution, she explained, was simple. I needed to sign a few documents, a transfer, just until things stabilized. She emailed the paperwork before the call ended. I didn't open the attachments. I forwarded them to my attorney instead and asked him one question. Who benefits if I sign this? He answered without hesitation. Not you. The next move came in public. It always does when people want witnesses. At a charity fundraiser downtown, white tent, string lights, donors who like to be photographed giving, Victoria found me near the bar. She'd had enough champagne to be confident. She's only here because I needed a tax write-off, she said to the couple beside her, loud enough for me to hear. She smiled like it was generous humor. I nodded once, as if she'd described the weather. What I noticed instead was the watch on her wrist. My grandfather's. One of a matched set he kept in a cedar box, each piece documented in his estate inventory. That watch wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her. I checked the records the next morning. Several items had been sold, quietly, before probate. Jewelry, art, small things that wouldn't be missed immediately. The proceeds had moved through an account I recognized, Elaine's. That same week, I received a credit alert. A new card, not mine, opened in my name. The address was correct. The signature wasn't. Charges followed quickly. Travel, furniture, a boutique I knew Victoria liked. When I confronted Elaine, she didn't argue. She sounded tired. I assumed you wouldn't mind, she said. We raised you to help. Online, the narrative shifted. Facebook posts appeared from relatives I barely spoke to. Long paragraphs about gratitude, about mental health, about daughters who imagined slights. Comments filled in the blanks for them. Ungrateful, unstable, delusional. Someone suggested I needed help. I archived everything. The final piece arrived by accident. Victoria left a voicemail meant for someone else. She'd been rushing. The message cut in mid-thought, her voice sharp, impatient. If something happened with her car, it would simplify the paperwork. I mean, it's not like anyone would question it. She laughed softly at the end. I saved the file twice. The night they put me out was colder than the forecast predicted. Elaine said it would be better if I left, just for a while. Space would calm things down. She handed me my coat like it was a favor. I stepped onto the driveway with no bag, no plan, the door closing behind me without ceremony. The house lights stayed on. Dinner continued. I stood there long enough to feel the temperature settle into my bones. Then I walked. By morning, my attorney had the recordings. My compliance team had the statements. My estate lawyer flagged the asset sales. The credit fraud was already documented. The voicemail was transcribed, time-stamped, authenticated. Paper insurance works best when people believe they've already won. They thought they'd erased me, isolated me, reduced me to noise no one would question. What they actually did was finish the file. By the time Thanksgiving returned, they were relaxed, confident, certain I'd learned my place. I arrived on time. They never noticed how calm I was. That should have warned them. My grandfather never raised his voice. He believed volume diluted truth. When he died, the family expected a spectacle. Reading, applause, numbers spoken aloud like blessings. Instead, there was a delay. Legal formalities. Administrative complications. Elaine complained about inefficiency. Victoria joked about old men who couldn't let go. They never asked why I didn't. The will they knew about was simple, predictable. It distributed objects, percentages, a sense of fairness that made everyone comfortable. It gave them something to hold while they waited for more. What they didn't know was that there was another document, older, quieter, not filed with the rest. My grandfather had called it a contingency. He left it with instructions that were precise enough to feel personal. The condition was simple. The beneficiary could not resist, could not reveal assets, could not correct insults or defend their name. Any attempt to assert ownership before confirmation would void the protection entirely. Silence wasn't humility, it was the test. Every humiliation had been accounted for, every exclusion, every theft. He'd designed it that way. Pressure reveals character faster than comfort ever could. The clues were scattered where only someone paying attention would notice. A notebook tucked behind ledgers in his study. Emails sent years apart with identical phrasing. A safety deposit box that required a key I'd been given as a teenager and told not to lose. Inside were copies. Duplicates of documents I'd already found on my own. Credit transfers, estate inventories, early drafts of trusts crossed out and rewritten. My name circled once in blue ink, then underlined. He had been watching. The line that mattered most was handwritten at the bottom of the final page, slightly slanted, as if written without urgency. Wealth does not belong to blood. It belongs to character. The will named me as sole beneficiary, but more importantly, it named me as protected. Legal insulation was built in from the start. Layers of trusteeship, automatic injunctions, standing agreements that activated without my consent. I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to. The family attorney, quiet, efficient, always present, had never worked for Elaine, or for Victoria. He'd been retained decades earlier, paid in advance, instructed to observe rather than intervene. His job was to wait. When the property assets were liquidated improperly, alerts triggered. When accounts were accessed out of sequence, timestamps were logged. When my identity was used without consent, documentation flowed into the file that already had a name. Paper insurance. My grandfather had trusted paper more than people. Paper didn't panic. It didn't love the wrong person. It didn't explain itself away. By the time the family thought they were forcing my hand, bankruptcy stories, credit manipulation, social isolation, they were completing the test exactly as written. I never argued. I never warned them. I never said the words they wanted me to say. That mattered. The attorney called me 3 days after I was locked out of the house. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked where I wanted to be seated. Front or back, he said. I chose neither. When Thanksgiving came again, the house looked the same. Same table, same chairs, same confidence. They believed they'd won something by surviving me. They didn't notice the additional place settings. They didn't recognize the unfamiliar faces when they arrived. They assumed it was another oversight. I took my seat without being asked. The attorney stood when it was time. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't smile. He said my grandfather's name once, and the room quieted. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Each sentence landed like a seal being pressed. Ownership transferred. Authority clarified. Protections activated. Victoria laughed once, then stopped when she realized no one joined her. Elaine reached for me and found only air. I listened without expression. Not because I felt nothing, but because nothing needed to be shown. The test was over, and for the first time, the silence belonged to me. The law office on Madison Avenue smelled like polished wood and quiet money. Floor-to-ceiling windows, frame degrees aligned with surgical precision, the kind of place where voices lower themselves automatically. My family arrived dressed for cameras that weren't there. Victoria wore black and gold, heels sharp enough to announce her confidence before she spoke. Elaine followed, pearls tight at her throat, posture rehearsed. They greeted the attorneys like allies, not realizing they were already guests in someone else's procedure. I came alone. No bag, no folder, just my coat folded over my arm. We were seated around a table that reflected everyone back at themselves. I noticed how often Victoria checked her phone, how Elaine kept her hand on her purse, as if something might be taken without warning. The attorney entered last, the same one who had attended birthdays, funerals, quiet consultations for years. He didn't acknowledge familiarity. Today, he was precise. He opened a thin file. "This is the final reading," he said. "There will be no discussion until I finish." No one objected. They were certain of the ending. He began with structure, dates, jurisdiction, confirmation of validity. Each sentence removed another assumption from the room. I watched Victoria's smile narrow, then reset. When my name was read as sole beneficiary, it didn't land immediately. Not like a shock, more like a delay in sound. Elaine leaned forward. "That can't be right," she said softly. "There must be an addendum." The attorney nodded. "There is." He signaled, and the lights dimmed slightly. A screen lowered without ceremony. The first video played. Bank statements, highlighted transfers, accounts opened under borrowed authority, dates aligned across years, tax discrepancies annotated in clean margins. Then audio, Elaine's voice, tired, certain, explaining why using my information was efficient, why it would never matter. Victoria shifted, laughed once, too loudly. Then another clip, a voicemail, her voice this time, casual, discussing how an accident would simplify paperwork. The timestamp pulsed at the bottom of the screen. The room went still. A knock sounded behind us. The door opened. A man stepped in, mid-50s, conservative suit. He didn't look at me. He looked at the attorney. "This is Mr. Keller," the attorney said, "former financial controller. You may remember him." Victoria did. Her face changed before her mouth did. "I was asked to adjust numbers," he said evenly. "I was paid to sign. I kept copies." He handed over a folder. Thick. Used. Victoria stood abruptly. "This is a mistake," she said, voice breaking its polish. "She doesn't deserve any of this." The attorney didn't look at her. He turned one page. "You signed everything," he said. "You just never read it." Elaine reached for me then, a reflex, a mother's habit. Her hand stopped midair. I hadn't moved. The attorney concluded with consequences. Asset freezes, investigations, referrals already submitted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Security arrived quietly, not for me. As they were escorted out, Elaine stiff, Victoria unraveling, I stayed seated. I waited until the room returned to its original quiet. The attorney asked if I wanted anything documented differently. I said no. Outside, Manhattan moved on schedule. Horns, footsteps, winter light reflecting off glass. I walked away without looking back. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. Some people inherit houses. Others inherit silence. I inherited my exit, and for the first time, it belonged entirely to me. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They arrive on schedule. 2 days after the will reading, the first calls went unanswered. Not because no one was dialing, but because lines had been cut into silence. Accounts froze in a sequence that felt almost polite. Notification, confirmation, restriction. Then nothing moved. By noon, it was official. Federal agents didn't announce themselves with urgency. They never do. The FBI came first, followed by the IRS, each operating within their lanes, sharing only what was necessary. Doors were opened with warrants already signed. Laptops were taken mid-login. Filing cabinets were photographed before they were emptied. Paper. Insurance doesn't shock. It suffocates. The bank accounts that had once funded dinners, lawyers, favors, locked within minutes. Automatic payments failed quietly. Cards declined without drama. Elaine learned this in a grocery store line, holding a basket she didn't need, staring at a screen that refused her. The house in Greenwich lasted longer. Real estate always does. For 3 weeks, the gates stayed closed while notices were processed. Then one morning, a laminated posting appeared at the front gate. Foreclosure. Asset seizure. Pending investigation. The wording was neutral. The effect was not. Neighbors slowed their cars. Phones came out. The Morgan house, always immaculate, always untouchable, stood empty by the end of the week. Movers didn't arrive. Officers did. Victoria tried to fight the timeline. She always believed urgency bent rules. Her professional license was suspended first. Not revoked. Suspended. Enough to stop income, not enough to provoke sympathy. Clients withdrew without explanation. Boards convened without her. The silence hurt more than accusations would have. Her husband lasted another month. Money had been the glue. Without it, conversations shortened. Apologies became negotiations. When it was clear there would be no recovery, no quiet settlement, no miracle appeal, he left with efficiency. He took what wasn't under review. He didn't look back. Elaine cried publicly once, outside a courthouse. The cameras caught it. It didn't help. Late tears don't reverse timestamps. They don't unsign documents. They don't reframe intent once it's recorded in your own voice. Friends disappeared in stages. First the distant ones, then the necessary ones, then the ones who had promised loyalty and meant convenience. Invitations stopped. Names weren't mentioned. The narrative shifted again, but this time there was no audience left to correct it. I heard all of this secondhand. I didn't visit the house. I didn't attend hearings. I didn't watch interviews. My involvement ended when the process no longer required my presence. That was the agreement. On the morning the foreclosure was finalized, I was in a different state. I watched a freight yard wake up from a cafe window. Trucks moved in clean lines. Systems responded to commands. Nothing asked how I felt. That suited me. People like to believe collapse feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels administrative, like gravity doing what it always does when support is removed. Victoria tried to reach me once. An email. Short. Unstructured. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It asked for help. I archived it. Elaine sent nothing. Pride lasts longer than hope. By the time indictments were filed, their names had already lost weight. They became examples, case numbers, cautionary stories told without detail. I remained unnamed. That was intentional. Freedom doesn't come from being seen winning. It comes from not being required to witness the loss. Some families leave scars. Others leave paperwork. Mine left both. I kept the paperwork, and when it was over, truly over, I closed the file, not with relief, but with finality, like shutting a door you don't intend to reopen. Outside, the world continued, unaware, uninterested, which was exactly how I wanted it. After the noise ended, what remained was space. Not the kind people imagine, no champagne, no speeches, just mornings without anticipation of impact. Afternoons that didn't require vigilance, evenings that arrived without rehearsal. I moved quietly, on purpose. The first thing I built wasn't a house. It was a structure that didn't carry my name, a fund with a narrow mission and clear rules. It existed to help people disentangle themselves from families who used money as leverage. Legal fees, emergency housing, document recovery. Nothing sentimental, nothing performative. I didn't attend the launch. I stayed close to the people who had been there when I wasn't solvent, when my credit was compromised, when my address changed too often to memorize. They didn't ask questions then. They don't ask now. We eat together without ceremony. We leave doors unlocked. We don't explain ourselves. That's what family feels like when it's chosen. My work changed shape, but not pace. I shifted from building systems to backing them. I invested in founders who didn't need validation, only runway. People who understood process. People who knew how to keep quiet when it mattered. Reputation followed without being invited. Meetings became shorter. Terms became cleaner. No one asked about my past. They didn't need to. The silence I once endured became an asset. I never corrected the story. I never clarified motives. I let the public version flatten until it no longer resembled anything real. That distance was useful. It kept my life intact. Some nights, I still think about the house in Greenwich. Not with anger. With the detachment reserved for places you once waited in, believing something would change if you stood still long enough. It didn't. I did. Healing didn't arrive as forgiveness. It arrived as disinterest. As the moment I realized I no longer needed witnesses, or vindication, or even memory to behave itself. Paper insurance sits archived now, sealed, not destroyed, just inactive. A reminder of what preparation looks like when love isn't reliable. I don't tell my story unless asked directly. And even then, I keep it factual. No adjectives, no conclusions. People fill in what they need. On a recent afternoon, I walked past a freight yard I helped redesign years ago. Trucks moved in precise intervals, no wasted motion, no excess force. The system worked because it didn't care who deserved what. It responded to inputs and constraints. That felt right. Freedom, I've learned, isn't the absence of damage. It's the presence of boundaries that hold without explanation. I didn't win. I exited. And in that exit, I claimed something quieter than revenge, heavier than justice, and far more durable than inheritance. I claimed myself. Nothing followed me out. That was the proof. The first thing I did was remove my name from every place it didn't need to be. Phone numbers changed, emails closed, addresses rerouted through intermediaries who understood discretion as a skill, not a courtesy. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. Silence doesn't require justification. Messages came anyway at first. Different numbers, different tones, threats disguised as concern, apologies shaped like demands. I didn't open them. Blocking is a mechanical act. You press a button, the noise stops. The last contact wasn't digital. It came through a lawyer who still believed in process. A request for a visit. One meeting, 10 minutes, supervised. I agreed without hesitation, not because I owed anything, but because I no longer did. The room was small and designed to erase context. Beige walls, a table bolted to the floor, a camera that didn't blink. The kind of place where time stretches without meaning. She was already there when I arrived, smaller than I remembered, still composed, still waiting for me to speak first. I didn't sit immediately. I stood long enough for the silence to establish itself. Then I took the chair across from her. She started with my name, the version she used when she wanted something. I held up one finger, not to interrupt, to set a boundary. "I don't hate you," I said. My voice didn't echo. "Hate requires effort. You're not worth it." The words landed without force. That was intentional. She searched my face for something. Anger, grief, a crack she could widen. There wasn't one. Not because I was empty, because I was finished. "I came to say this once," I continued, "so you don't mistake silence for confusion." I stood. The guard shifted. Time resumed. She said my name again, sharper this time. I didn't turn around. That was the end of it. Afterward, I didn't feel relief or triumph. I felt accuracy, like correcting a measurement that had been wrong for years. Silence isn't passive. It's a decision you keep making when no one is watching. It denies people the role they prepared for. It removes the audience they require to exist. They expected rage or forgiveness or a scene they could reinterpret later. They got none. The longest sentence isn't prison. It's irrelevance. I walked out without marking the moment. No glance back, no summary, no closing statement. Silence followed me, not as absence, but as authority. And it stayed. Time didn't soften what happened. It clarified it. Years passed without markers. No anniversaries, no rituals. The past stayed where it belonged, documented, closed, uninvited. I learned that memory loses its edge when it's no longer needed as proof. People asked what I gained from all of it. They meant money, property, leverage. They wanted a figure large enough to justify the damage. I never gave them one. The truth was quieter. I inherited the ability to choose who had access to me, to my time, to my attention, to my name. That kind of control doesn't show up on balance sheets, but it governs everything else. I kept working, not to build monuments, but systems that didn't depend on approval. I declined interviews. I avoided panels. I let others speak while I listened. Silence, I'd learned, scales better than noise. Sometimes I walked through places that once defined me, courthouses, offices, the edges of neighborhoods where I'd waited for permission that never came. They looked smaller now, not because they changed, but because I no longer did. I never reconciled. That word assumes symmetry. It assumes two sides reaching for balance. What existed before wasn't imbalance, it was extraction. You don't reconcile with a mechanism. You disengage from it. I didn't forgive either. Forgiveness implies a debt acknowledged and released. There was no acknowledgement, no request, no repair. I stopped needing closure when I realized it was a luxury for people who still wanted the door open. The final thing I inherited wasn't wealth. It was authorship. I became the person who decided what the story meant by no longer telling it, by refusing to perform recovery, by understanding that healing doesn't always look like peace. It can look like precision, like knowing exactly where not to stand. One afternoon, I stood at a window watching a river move through a city that didn't know my name. The current was steady, unconcerned. It didn't argue with obstacles. It went around them, through them, past them. That was the metaphor that stayed. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives when nothing pulls at you anymore. No rage, no longing, no need to be seen. I didn't escape my past. I outgrew it. And when I walked away for the last time, there was no audience, no echo, no shadow following behind. Just forward motion. That was the inheritance that lasted.